the Chief Information Security Officer for the University of Vermont Medical Center Health Network. Continues to impress me over time, just being very transparent and very accessible and very multi-stakeholder in the way he talks. But they, as we indicated earlier, they were the victims of one of the worst and most protracted cyber disruptions, not just on U.S. soil, but during the pandemic. And they had a lot of lessons learned, and they could have hidden all their hard-earned lessons, but they've increasingly been sharing. And I think one of our common pieces of tissue why we wanted him here today is it's not about security of data. It's not just protecting patient data. It's protecting patient lives. It's not just about checklists or compliance or privacy. It's about resilience, which sounds like a synonym, but resilience is really, can you take a punch? Can you get knocked down and get back up? Can you continue to do your job in adverse conditions? And I just think he's a beautiful human being, and I can't wait to hear his speech. We're going to go a little long to make sure he gets exactly the amount, and we'll just cut into lunch a little bit if necessary. But let's give a hearty welcome to Nate.
UVM Health Network. So we are a small health system serving Vermont and upstate New York. We have one academic medical center, 5 community hospitals, and 1 home health and hospice affiliate. We have the privilege of serving about 1 million lives. Now, if you look at the spread of the hospitals that we have and the distance between them, spread 1 million people out over that range, and you get the feeling that it's a pretty rural situation. But we also have what I like to call big fish in a small pond syndrome. Because while we are mostly serving a rural population and are primarily small, 3 of those 5 community hospitals are designated critical access hospitals. Also, our academic medical center is the academic medical center for the state of Vermont. It's the tertiary care center for the state of Vermont. It's the pediatric hospital for the state of Vermont. It's essentially the lab for the entire state of Vermont. So we both have to kind of shrink down and deal with small critical access challenges, as well as try to pretend like we're bigger than we are and deal with larger system challenges as well. And there was this too. As Josh mentioned, we were the victim of a cyber attack. This was October of 2020, right in the height of the pandemic. Whenever I tell people that, the first thing they want to know is, what's it actually like behind the scenes of a ransomware event at a hospital? It is not glorious war rooms like you might see on a TV show. It's not blinking lights or whizzing hard drives. This is what it looks like. This is a few days in. At this point, I'd given up on trying to go to the office. I couldn't sacrifice the road time. So, one side, that's me, 7 a.m. in the morning, camped out on the couch, dog on my lap, every screen I could find in the house, trying to coordinate chaos, running multiple phones at once. 10, 11 o'clock, whatever it was that same night, I'm still camped out on this couch in the exact same spot. My wife had dropped a blanket on me at some point during the day. The dog is still on my lap. This was my life, 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, for a month straight. My family brought me food, right? I didn't see them ever. Like my wife, when she left for work, would drop off a bag of food by the bed, and this is just what I did. There's a reason I always start my talks with this. So I had a peer who, she would always start her talks with pulling up that map that purported to be showing cyber attacks going on at the time. You'd see lights whizzing back and forth on the map, right? Kind of nonsense, but it got people's attention. Afterwards, people would tell me, oh, that talk was so great, I really enjoyed it. I'd say, well, great, what was the thing you took away from that talk? They'd say that map in the beginning was really nifty and neat. So if you take nothing else away from my talk and the only thing you remember is my goofy dog sitting on my lap, at least you realize that cyber attacks are a human issue, not a technical issue. Because no matter how disrupting this was to my life, this was nothing to our nurses and doctors and what they were experiencing trying to care for patients. And nothing that any of us for the health system dealt with even holds a candle to the stress and pressure of being a patient or being the family member or friend of a patient during this. The other thing I figured out giving these talks, if I don't tell you how it happened, then you don't pay attention to the rest of the talk waiting to ask me how it happened. So let's just get that out of the way. Here's how it happened. We're in the middle of the pandemic. We had surged from having, less than 200 people who maybe occasionally work remotely to now we had over 2,000 remote workforce. We had no idea how to operate with a remote workforce. We're a hospital, we don't have remote employees. But so we had a bunch of people hopping on and off VPN, in and out of security controls. We had one employee who was going on vacation to see some family because it was October, they were starting to loosen up travel restrictions a little bit. Brought her laptop with her in case she needed to do work. She got a panicked call from her other daughter. She had received an email from her HOA with an attachment. She couldn't get the attachment to open. There was some threat around this. The mom, trying to be helpful, said, send it to me. So the daughter sent it to her Gmail account. She opened that on her work laptop because it was the only thing she had with her. Attachment didn't work. She didn't think much more of it and told her daughter, well, it's not working, contact your HOA. Ask them to resend. Shut down her laptop, didn't think about it, went on to their vacation. Well, the reality is that a threat actor had compromised the property management company, gone through their sent items, trolled out who there was that they were sending to, pulled form emails that they used, made an email that matched up to that form email, and attached their malware to that. And that's what they were sending out. We weren't even targeted specifically as a healthcare organization. It was the dumb luck of having an employee whose daughter was a member of an HOA that was a part of this property management company that we compromised. So she comes back to work a couple weeks later, turns her laptop on, fires it up next to the VPN. Well, what that malware did is it had a scheduled job that whenever the machine turned on, it did a scan of the network to say, am I on a personal network or am I on a corporate network? If it was on a personal network, it just shut down and waited until it turned on again. If it was on a corporate network, it phoned home and said, we're on a good one. So immediately after it phoned home, threat actors jumped in onto that box, pivoted through it, and started attacking the rest of the network. They were quickly able to escalate privileges. So the initial account was just a standard user account. They managed to work their way up to domain admin and go from there. They didn't try to encrypt machines one by one. They went straight for the virtual infrastructure and just encrypted every virtual hard disk all at once. So the entire virtual data center went down. They then proceeded to deploy malware out onto over 5,500 endpoints so that if we cleaned up and turned back on, hopefully we'd miss one of those and they could just come back and do it all over again. If you took this and said, well, what's our whole dwell time, from that initial email to when we get there, is something like 2 weeks. But if you take it from what is the time that the laptop phoned home and said, come get me, it's less than 60 minutes. So these move quickly. Technical impact, we had over 1,300 servers go offline in less than 15 minutes. That was over 600 applications that were running on those systems. We had over 5,500 endpoints also infected, and we essentially had no communications. The very first thing that went down was the phone system. Happened to be the first hard drive in the directory list of virtual hard drives was the phone system server. So when we first started, we were starting troubleshooting a phone system. And then we were troubleshooting what we thought was a storage network failure until we eventually figured out what was really going on. This is the timeline of recovery. So I'll start on the 28th. You see it was a flurry of activity. We originally started troubleshooting, figured out about 2:30 in the afternoon that it was actually malicious. Engaged our IR partner, started all of that work. The next morning, FBI's at the door front, waiting to hang out. Luckily, we actually had a pre-existing relationship with our local field office, so that actually didn't go as badly as it could have. By the 30th, we weren't running endpoint detection and response at the time. We took the 29th, we got it deployed out. We used our own IOCs we got from the FBI, and we searched the network, and that was the point at the very beginning of the 30th when we realized oh crap. It was not this small initial area that we thought we had found and contained. It was actually the 5,500 endpoints. It wasn't until November 2nd that we were able to even be in a place where we started restoring servers and applications. We had to complete the basic forensics work to know what we were dealing with, get that isolated. We had to rebuild just some core infrastructure to even have things to restore onto, right? It wasn't until the 4th that we were able to start working on endpoints. The entire infrastructure that we relied on to image endpoints was itself gone. So we had to rebuild that. We couldn't rebuild it in the way that it was and actually do things in place. We had to build temporary versions of it in conference rooms with isolated networks and go collect equipment, bring them back to the conference room to image, and send them back out. We also stood up, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, the Epic Bubble on that day. Later, we stood up what I called Epic Castle. And it wasn't until November 22nd that we had enough applications recovered that it was safe to bring Epic back online in a read-write mode. And this is something that a lot of people don't necessarily realize, is that an EMR is not a standalone system. It is wildly interconnected with many other applications. And if one of those applications that are needed in that workflow isn't up and operating, it's dangerous to allow the clinician to have write access to the EMR, because there is going to be expected things that should happen. When I put this order in, it should trigger these things. And if those things don't happen as expected, it's dangerous to the patient. So it's actually safer to not give them that access. But as far as when we actually stopped recovering production applications, it wasn't until February 19th. We were continuing to have to bring applications back, because you can't just flip them back on either. Every application that recovered, we recovered it into an isolated network, scanned it to make sure it was safe, went through hardening process to get it ready, and then released it back into general population. My cyber incident response plan was done here on the 30th. Anyone who's in the cyber part of the world, and we make these incident response plans and we feel great about them, at the end of them they have a box that usually says something like, and then IT recovers the systems. Right? And as far as we're concerned, we're like, our job is done right here, right? I've done my part. And honestly, the cyber part of this didn't go that badly, right? I mean, we're talking a day and a half through that. But here's the deal. That box, that was still my box. I thought that's when I handed it off. That's not when you hand it off, right? Every single step from there was still had to be a cyber decision. How do we recover this safely? We need to do something in the interim. How do we do that safely, right? And we bring this back up. Should we do this? Constant decisions about risk decisions throughout it. Here's the scarier part. Our really good downtime plans, and I want to be clear, they weren't all good. Our really good downtime plans ended here. Right? Here's where we really came back and started acting like a hospital again. You can see there's a pretty big gap between those. Downtime plans traditionally were built around knowable, known downtimes. From a technology perspective, on the weak side, it was things like dealing with an upgrade. On the long side, it might be dealing with some kind of technology outage, something broke. But IT teams have gotten pretty good at fixing things, and so the clinical area had expectations that it shouldn't be that long. Or maybe you have good emergency management planning and you've got some downtime plans that are around something like a flood or a hurricane. But again, those are known finite times. So those plans were really based around at longest 3 days. We needed 3 weeks. The other part to understand is really, even though the systems were back here, you still have to backload all of that paper. Everything that was done manually has to get put back in the system. That work continued on through at least May. So hopefully I think one of the things I want people to catch out of that is cyber recovery and disaster recovery are not the same thing. We've done a lot of work in healthcare talking about disaster recovery and not so much about cyber recovery. Disaster recovery has all these concepts like, well, we'll make high availability systems and we'll have failover and we'll have replication. And that's great, you replicated the attack. It's useless. Okay? It's not that those things are bad. The challenge is we have taught the clinical folks to expect those things, and we haven't been honest with them that that's not the only thing they should expect. Bringing it back to the real impact for a minute. That first night, I got a call, and that call was, we don't have a downtime plan for cancer patients. How do we not have a downtime plan for cancer patients? Well, the response I got was, we can't mix a chemo cocktail by eye. Not something I'd ever thought about, right? There are parts of your healthcare system that cannot run without their technology. There isn't a paper version of some of these services. After I was done getting sick, we went to work standing up an isolated interim solution for radiation oncology. We built a completely standalone network and we stood up their core systems within it to get them going so that they could actually treat the cancer patients that were going to show up the next day. Well, what you'll see is even though we did that, there was no way for us to keep up the volume that we expect to do. It's kind of like Josh was talking about. We use technology as a force multiplier. There's everything else that goes into dealing with treating those patients. Scheduling, communication, all of those things are necessary. Without those, it doesn't matter, even if you have the ability to do the treatment, you can't carry the load of patients. So we had to go through difficult triaging decisions, you know, who can wait, who's capable of going to a different location to receive those services, who can't wait and who can't travel, and those are the people that we're going to treat. What you see is, you know, we dropped the amount of visits we were doing, the amount of infusions we were doing basically in half. And the part that I really like to point out from this graph is you'll see cyber attack ends here. It's not until 3 weeks after the cyber attack that we're actually back to full capacity for treating cancer patients. Because you have to unknot that mess that you've made of re-diverting people and moving people around. So getting actually back to it, it's whatever your downtime is, and then another 3 weeks. There are a few things that were not directly impacted. And it would have been a lot worse had this not been a slide that I could put up. Right? Patient monitoring wasn't impacted. Our lab wasn't directly impacted. I say directly because right, the lab is still challenged by the fact that communications can't happen out from the lab. But the lab functions itself for operating. And the primary set of our medical devices were in good shape. The reason for that, we put network segmentation in around these things. I'd love to take credit and say it was because I knew this was coming and I put all these things in for this reason. That isn't really true. Patient monitoring happened to be segmented because of the vendor relationship that we had, and it was a vendor managed system, and so we had made a decision that it should be on a completely separate network. The lab I had segmented because anyone who's ever worked with a lab device knows that the most insecure things in the world. So I was worried about them hurting the rest of the network, and so I put protections in that, funnily enough, protected them from the rest of the network that I was trying to protect. Right? This is really, really hard to do in healthcare. Right? You know, there is obviously a lot of healthcare organizations that are suffering ransomware attacks. But clearly there are more organizations than healthcare that are suffering these attacks, or it simply wouldn't be lucrative enough. There's not enough of us to support the cybercrime infrastructure that there is. So there are plenty of other industries also getting hit. You don't hear about them in the same way for a couple of different reasons. One, healthcare has to tell people when bad stuff happens. Others can brush it under the rug. Two, obviously we're a public-facing service, so it's more obvious. But 3, it's simply more impactful to a healthcare organization to be hit with a ransomware attack than some other organizations, because the way we are architected is an indefensible architecture. Whereas you might talk about a manufacturing organization where they have a monolithic manufacturing system, it's on a clean, fully separate network. If they have a ransomware attack in their corporate environment, it sucks, but it's not taking down manufacturing, right? They have those things segmented in separate worlds. We do not have this concept in healthcare. And like Josh was talking about, we stuffed technology into an existing operation. It wasn't built this way. It's a complex, interconnected web of systems that are all running in the same environment. Many healthcare organizations are very flat in their networks. One of the other big challenges is getting at the data. So we're an Epic shop. Other EMRs have similar concepts that for downtimes, they have some kind of business continuity computer. It's a computer that sits out on the floor and we run reports to it. Your downtime reports. If something goes bad, nurses and doctors are taught, well, you go to that computer and you pull up the reports to get the information you need on the patients you have that day. At the time of this, Epic's recommendation was you should have 3 days of reports. We blew through those 3 days very, very quickly, and we had to do something. We had no access to patient data. The first thing we did was we actually used our health information exchange. Usually we're sending data to them for it to be other people to get access to it. We made a bunch of accounts so that we could get access back to our own data, so we could at least pull up patient history. But what's in the HIE is not everything that's in your EMR. So the first thing we did is what we called the Epic bubble. We took and built an isolated network. We stuck a version of Epic on it, the reporting database, and we attached to it a handful of just clean, new built computers with printers. And I took all of the IT executives that had nothing better that they could do, and I sat them down there and I let them run downtime reports all day. And they opened a report, clicked run, clicked print, and someone took it and faxed it or ran it to the places that need to be. So they at least knew what they had for patients. That obviously isn't great. So once we had some infrastructure back up, a little bit of our virtual desktop infrastructure, enough to do some authentication again, and my network team built an isolated environment. We stood up Epic read-only in it with enough virtual desktop infrastructure so that we could get read-only access from the thin clients that were sitting in the treatment rooms. And so our nurses and doctors could finally get in and at least have read access to the EMR. Epic has taken this idea and basically productized it. So you can buy this now. I think they call it Epic Cloud Read-Only Business Continuity Service or something like that. I said they came up with that lame name instead of calling it Epic Castle so they didn't have to pay me royalties. Here's the thing. I can't afford to buy it. I've been denied budget 2 years in a row now to buy the thing that we designed to get ourselves through it. This is the reality that healthcare is. It took us an army to recover. And I'm not joking about that or just using a metaphor. Our governor mobilized the National Guard to help us. That was something that other states haven't done, and it was a huge help for us. What I will say is the only real reason we were able to take advantage of that is because we had a pre-existing relationship. Just so happens to be that multiple members of my team themselves are Guards members or former Guards members, so we had that existing relationship. Through that relationship, they go and they have these defensive cyber elements that are supposed to be there to help the country like this. I had actually gone on a training exercise with this group a year or two prior and played the role of the civil partner that they were helping during one of these attacks. So we'd actually kind of done this before. So we were able to kind of use that muscle memory and bring them in. Even still, when they showed up, they had their plan. Here's what we're going to do for you, sir. Great. By the time we were done getting through the paperwork of memorandums and understanding all that, those are all the things we'd already done. So I said, well, thanks, this is great, we're done all of this. To their credit, they said, understood, sir, how can we help? We pulled up their roster of skill set, what those people had for background, what they did during their day job when they weren't wearing a uniform, and based on that, we plugged them into the teams. Put some people helping restore systems, some people into my security team, and other people, we handed them a cart, and they ran around the hospital and they pulled bad computers off the desk and put new ones on and helped us do that, and they did whatever needed to be done. We could not have gotten through this without that emergency support from the National Guard. So what's been my message to peers out of this? I have really asked my peers to think about their programs like a boxer thinks about a fight. Now, obviously, if you just stand there flat-footed with your gloves at your waist and just let yourself get punched in the face, it's going to be a pretty short fight, right? So I'm not suggesting anyone should do that. But at the same time, if you step into that ring thinking you're never going to get hit, when you take one on the chin, you're going to be in for a world of hurt. So I want people to realize you're going to get hit. You need to be able to take a hit. Josh talked about the different performance goals and things like that earlier. At the time we were hit, I could have checked the box on every single one of the essential goals and over half of the enhanced goals. Still got hit, right? So I don't want anyone to think, I'm not trying to tell people you shouldn't do those things, right? Not doing those things is standing there with your gloves at your waist. But don't think that just because you do those things, you're not going to get hit. And the other thing I tell people is even the toughest boxers, you get hit enough times, you get hit hard enough, you're going to get knocked down. You got to be able to get back up off the mat. Some of the things I've tried to do to help with this, I've gotten involved with a couple different groups. One of those is the Cyber Working Group under HSCC. I'm helping out with the Incident Response and Business Continuity Task Force there. We put out 2 materials that I helped contribute to. And the thing you'll find if you go read these is they have almost nothing to actually do with cybersecurity and almost nothing to do with technology. They're about how to deal with the response and working through that. The first one was our kind of stop the bleeding type of situation. It was, we used the hospital incident command structure type of concept to emergency management, and we said, well, here's a hit list of things to do to get through the first 12 hours. The idea being we know we have a lot of hospitals out there that have not planned for this as a hazard scenario at all. So knowing that you're going to have to try and put some plans together in the middle of it, here use this to at least get you through the first 12 hours to give you a chance to catch your breath and figure out what you're doing. The second one is meant to be a little bit more planful. It's a template. It's for how do you coordinate those plans together. So we've made cyber incident response plans. Our IT teams have made disaster recovery plans. Emergency management has made emergency management plans. We've got downtime plans. We've got all these different plans. We almost never talk to each other, right? And so then the problem becomes fitting those things together. So that's the idea of CHIRP, is talking about how do you put those things together and what's a cadence to run those through. There's certain steps that are okay to run in parallel, and there's things that you shouldn't do before the other one's ready. If you go one way or the other, you can get yourself in trouble, right? If one group runs too far ahead, then they can start causing a mess. But if people think they need to wait on everything for someone else and you serialize it too much, you extend the downtime longer than you need to. Now, the fighters are not the only people in the arena during a fight. We've got fans cheering them on. We've got hecklers telling them, stop getting punched in the face because I've got money on this fight, right? A lot of what we hear, the industry's perception about what we hear from other partners often ends up sounding like one of those two things. And while we maybe appreciate the fans a little bit more than the hecklers, the reality is neither of them actually help. The people in the arena outside the fighters that help are the people that are actually in the corner of the fighter, right? They're not just cheering them on, they're not just telling them to stop getting hit. They're the ones that are telling them, here's how you're getting hit. Not just how you're getting hit. You're letting your guard down here. You're gonna get hit there, right? They're patching them up in between rounds. They've got smelling salts at the ready to actually recover them if needed, right? That's what we need. So, if you want to get in the corner of healthcare, and this is something that I talk about, whether you're a government partner, whether you're within healthcare, whether you're, private citizens that are helping out, these are things to think about for getting in the corner of healthcare. Kind of like Josh talked about resilience. I want to see resilience included in any guidelines or standards that go out. We can't only focus on not getting hit because we're going to still get hit. So if we don't include resilience, we're setting people up to fail. I want to consider not just how we've been hit, but how could we be hit too. Obviously, if the jab is landing, your opponent's gonna keep throwing the jab all day. But as soon as you put your hands up to block the jab, they're gonna take the body shot, right? We need to not fool ourselves into thinking that just because this is what has happened to date, that's the only thing that's possible. We need to think regionally about this. At the beginning of the talk, I talked about how we were the only tertiary care center, right? Different regions have different risks, and there's different potential solutions for different regions as well. In rural areas, your risk is primarily a geographic risk, right? It's how far you're going to need to go to get care if that service is out at this location. In an urban area, you don't necessarily have that geographic risk, but guess what? You have a population risk that the rurals don't have. So you may have a hospital down the street, but guess what? They don't have beds to take the overflow. So we have to think about this unique to each region and think about what are the solutions that are right for that region. I really, really, really want cyber recognized as a true hazard. There's a lot we do in this country talking about hazard planning. FEMA, other things, we talk about this, right? We've started to kind of include cyber, but it's really always a sort of like a tag along, right? You have like the group of real friends, and then there's like that kid who kind of like follows them around, right, and hopes to hang out and maybe can sit with them at the lunch table. That's what cyber feels like when we talk about hazard conversations a lot of times. We've got emergency planning that we're doing at the national and state level around floods and hurricanes. We need to behave like that for cyber. Josh mentioned not a lot of people will do what I'm doing right now. The reason a lot of people won't do what I'm doing right now is because there's a significant concern about civil liabilities and the potential regulatory impacts of it. Me talking about things like this is considered dangerous by lawyers, right? I'm kind of lucky I come from Vermont. We're stubborn, right? We don't let people tell us that what we're doing is bad for us and that we shouldn't do it. We're going to do it anyways because we want to help our neighbor. There's not a lot of organizations that are willing to do that because of the risk that's there. The only way we get better at this is being able to be open and learn from each other, and we can't do that if we're not allowed to talk about it. We need to try and figure out other ways to handle the Change Healthcares and the everyone else, other than asking hospitals to become the regulator for every third party. We are struggling to manage our own risk. Thinking that we can manage a third party's risk is laughable, right? Hospitals are not equipped to be able to evaluate all of the other risks that are coming from all of the third parties. And we need to be reasonable about resourcing and funding considerations. We need to understand where these organizations are at and how do you help them. Maybe that's funding. Maybe that's creative ideas about how we do resourcing and bring things in emergency services, and maybe you're not expecting every small rural hospital to build out their own and complete resilience capabilities, and how do we bring some of those in as needed, right? So the last thing I'll leave you with. This is where my boxer analogy completely falls apart. The best boxers in the world can throw a punch. We don't get to hit back, right? We absolutely don't get to hit back as hospitals. Even our government partners who hit back a little bit, you take down a botnet, it's kind of a slap, not a hit, right? We're not really impacting their functions. They can keep going. So if we can't win this fight by being stronger than them, which has kind of always been the American way, right? We can't win this fight by being Captain America. We have to win the fight by being Steve Rogers. We have to be the kid that's willing to stand up to the bullies, and no matter how many times they punch us, no matter how many times we fall down, we keep getting back up. And we never give them what they want. And only then, eventually, will the bullies give up, realizing they're not going to get it from us. That's the only way we win. That's what I got.
I'm going to ask a technical question. So my research is centered around, AI and ML technology and the applications in cyber. So my question is, you talk about 4 other things to prepare for the next attack. I wonder, have you given any thoughts about what technology you wish you had could, minimize the damage for the next attack, or allow you to recover faster?
Yeah, so on technologies, I mean, there's a few. I tend not to focus the talk on that, because guess what, they're going to change. But things that were, would have been more helpful, we did not have endpoint detection and response in place at the time. And I don't want to put that out there as something that necessarily is going to stop this, but one of the challenges is when you're talking about those 5,500 endpoints that were impacted, we didn't have that black box on the airplane, right, to let us know exactly what had happened with those. So we could possibly think about other ways to roll that back, systemically, right? Instead, we had to say, well, we know that these are the impacted. We don't know exactly what's done on them. They're untrusted. We have to wipe and replace them. That makes it a much longer pull in the tent for getting to recovery. So that is one thing that I've pushed on from a technology perspective. That's been hard. You're not doing that without budget. Those are not cheap tools, but that is one of the ways to shorten the recovery timelines.
Maybe one more?
I got one. So to that point, responding to a cyber attack with cyber things only goes so far. What did you learn about some non-cyber responses to the cyber attack that were important that may not have been so obvious when you started?
Yeah, so the non-cyber attack side of it, we touched on a little bit, is really around the downtime planning for it. And helping the clinicians understand in their downtime planning what a cyber outage actually means. Many of the downtime plans, we talked about short duration, but also a lot of them were like application specific. What am I gonna do because the Epic EMR was down? Not what am I gonna do without any technology whatsoever. So going through that with them, working that out, actually drilling that with them. We had these super complex downtime forms that there'd been tons of work that got put into them. They got thrown away in like 12 minutes. We've been in fact using the trifolds from 1984, and that worked better. So really working with the clinicians to help them understand the true impact of a cyber attack, and then working through it with them around those plans is a big deal outside of the cyber.